podcast. I'm super hyped today because we are talking with Jarell Wall, the CEO of Gentleman Quinns, a Colorado based blunt company. I'm sure Jarrell's going to get us into a little bit more of like what entails into the Gentleman Quinns brand. I think we were just kind of like teasing up. You were mentioning a team building experience outside of the state of Colorado. So I'm curious if you're getting into other markets, what that looks like. But really wanted to kind of kick things off because Jarell has been a longtime listener of the podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in,
Yes.
for being such a big supporter of this show and just everything that goes on in my crazy brain and world that I'm trying to bring to the community and to the world. And with that, we had a chance to connect because you were so great and just like started engaging and like supporting. And that really meant a lot to me. And then when I was in Denver for the Cannabis Marketing Summit by the Cannabis Marketing
Absolutely.
Association, they had an event that we were both speakers at, and you were just so sweet and generous. You hooked me up with some Gentleman Quinn's products
I
and got
fanned
to
out. I ain't gonna
enjoy.
lie. Totally fanned out.
I appreciate you so much. Like, it just literally means so much that I'm able to connect with other entrepreneurs, people who are just like grinding it and like hitting the pavement and being able to, mutually respect what we're doing and just appreciate what we're bringing to the market. And so, yeah, I got a chance to enjoy some of your products. Low key brought them. I don't know. I live in Texas. I brought them somewhere, and I got to enjoy it with my dad. So that was really special. So
That's awesome.
welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
No, thank you. I really appreciate this platform. And like I said, I definitely fanned out when I meet you. So
Uh,
when I met you, so I was like, okay, let me try to calm down. But you definitely have some favorite folks in cannabis that have been on this show. Get a
Thank
lot of
you.
information from marketing people, and I just appreciate the opportunity.
Oh my God. Well, today's going to be a great conversation because we're talking all about you and your
Hey,
business. So let's kind of start there. I know what Gentleman Quinn's is with the lens of what products you bring to market, which is a blunt. I know there's a little bit of a history of how you got connected to Gentleman Quinn because Gentleman Quinn is actually a person. I'd love
yes.
to just hear, the story, the inception. Also, as you know, so much value comes from these introductions where people can really start to see themselves in your shoes. How did you get to where you are? What were you doing kind of before you got into the cannabis industry? What brought you to Denver? How long have you been in Denver? Kind of answering some of those questions. So whenever you're ready to dive into your
Oh, for sure.
your
So this is
inception, we're
wow.
ready.
So that's a lot right there. So how do we start this? Well, I'm from Indiana. I went to college in Georgia, and I used to work in television. I used to be a television producer, a sound engineer, published photographer, published graphic designer, all of those different things. But I came to
Okay.
Colorado because I had an affinity for cannabis. Uh, most of the experience I've had in terms of traveling, free travel, friends that I've met, all came from the cannabis community. I actually got my first job in television by way of mentors that introduced me to the cannabis culture. So I have a big affinity for it. So 2012 happened. I had a buddy I went to college with. Him and his wife moved out here. They invited me to come out and visit, and I was like, "Oh man, if I get any chance to move to Colorado, I want to do it." I had no intentions of being a business owner. Had no intentions of really even working in the industry. I was just wanted to be around it. But in 2014, I had a transition with my job, and I had an opportunity to move from Atlanta. I had some options outside of some even more stable options outside of Colorado, but I was like, if I get one opportunity in Colorado, I'm gonna take it. So I had an opportunity to work at another television company as a kind of a freelance to be full time position. Uh, my buddy who was living out here introduced me to a few of the guys that worked at a dispensary, and they were like, "Well, you work in television, can't you do marketing for us?" And I didn't. I've always been an illustrator and things like that, but cannabis really opened up that lens of creativity for me. So I was really just doing a service job in television, working with voiceover artists and things like that, and broadcasting and stuff. But once they just said if you can do it, we give you this gig, I was like, sure, I'll try it. So really that's when I got introduced to the industry. Worked for a company called Colorado Medical back during the medical days. They had me doing magazine ads, product labels and things like that, social media, early on. So that's kind of where I got started into the industry. And really, I'd say probably 3 or 4 weeks after starting that job, the general manager of that company, his name was Austin, and another bud tender who we now know as Gentleman Quinn, we all just kind of formulated together a product that we thought would sell out of that dispensary. What we noticed was during the medical days, there were way more dispensaries. It was more dispensaries on every corner. Uh, so it was not much differentiation between products. And as they have me doing marketing, I'm over looking at every type of magazine to see what can we do different than what's being done in cannabis. At the time, everybody, all they would really do is just put photos of their logo and just a weed plant. It wasn't really much difference. It wasn't, the conventional thinking was weed sold itself, which at the time it did. But as you're thinking of this as a full industry, from the previous industry where you just had guys bringing them trash bags of weed and selling it at the store, as regulations started to come in, more rules started to come in, you kind of start to needed to see this industry more as a actual industry that needed actual marketing, actual differentiation, and things like that. So uh, we thought, well, we could bring, if we could have a different product into the store, we bring more folks into our dispensary. And we noticed that the pre-roll market at the time was really just a throwaway product. If you had trim, you had extra biomass at your grow, you could just put that in a joint and you just put it on the shelf for like $2 or $3 and whatnot. A lot of times folks were just giving out joints for free. When I came from Atlanta, we had a lot of propaganda when legalization happened from the West Coast. So we get on Reddit and they show like weed vending machines, they show weed barbecue sauce, all sorts of stuff that didn't exist. So when I came out here, there really were a lot of different products. You had flour, but the biggest products were like goo pens and edibles. And I was like, this is kind of weird. You would think the first product that I have the biggest influence would be either a joint, maybe a blunt. I slowly realized that the reason there weren't any blunts is because tobacco was expressly forbidden. And obviously, a blunt is usually tobacco cast with marijuana in it, based on the way that people enjoyed the cannabis base before legalization happened. So it kind of let us know that there was an opportunity to do something in that realm, as well as an opportunity to do something within the pre-roll realm. And that's kind of where we just got started. So we formulated, without going into the crazy long story, me, Gentleman Quinn and Austin went on a team building exercise. We really just went to a mountaintop in Boulder, and we were like, we're just going to smoke and just learn about each other. And Gage, Gentleman Quinn, he rolled us a blunt, and we thought it was a tree twig because we come from illegal states. We have like blunts that are like pencils. So he's from Colorado. He rolled this gigantic blunt, and we were like, okay, if this is real, and it was, then this should be something that we investigate how we could put this on shelves, because no one was doing anything more than like 2 or 3 grams, 0.5 grams, nothing really big, because again, these are throwaway products. So we were like, he already had a specific amount that he puts into them. We didn't formulate the 2 gram thing. That was exactly what his process was. So we were like, okay, that kind of fell into our laps. We called him Gentleman Quinn because he wrote us the blunt. So that fell into our laps. We were like, we could just name it at that. And then the very next day, when we were kind of like figuring out a way to present this to the business owners, Austin told me we should call this the high class big ass blunt. And I was like, I have no questions about that. This is exactly it. So the universe is kind of formulated up for us to make this product. And really, I had the idea that it was for me to kind of, herald this to the public. I've gotten so many of these pieces in my toolbox that, we could just let it fall away and just have a cool night, or we could actually see if we could push forward with it. Uh, at a certain point, I believe it was about 2 or 3 weeks later, after we already figured out some packaging ideas and whatnot, we had a, a whiteboard. We brought it to the business owners of that dispensary. We asked them, hey, you guys mind if we try out this product? You guys provide the flour, we provide the manpower, the marketing, and all that type of stuff that I was already doing. As long as, and they said, you guys can do it as long as the store keeps running. This doesn't take away from the actual responsibilities of the business. Try it out. So we tried it out. We put about 40 blunts on the market. I guess I should preface this by saying we actually don't use tobacco. We actually found a hemp wrap manufacturer that we use. We saw a lot of things on the internet. We tried a lot of different things, but we found our own manufacturer that gave us a small amount of sample wraps and whatnot to see if we wanted to try it, and we used those to do our first run of blunts, and that was really our proof of concept, is the way we saw it. So we did it. We did about 40 blunts at the time, and they sold out within a week. And then the business owners are like, how about you guys try it again? We'll just double that. So we doubled it up again. Those sold out, and in between that time, we had a few product business owners that would come into that dispensary to try to sell their products. And this is the time, like now, you have a lot of you got Leaf Link that you could do it independently. You have sales folks that come in, but at the time, it was so new. business owners would come in. So we met different licensees with the red badges and stuff, and they tell us about their products, and they see our blunts in these nice little boxes right next to their products, and they, what the hell is that? And we tell them like, this is what we just do in the store. So one guy actually sat us down for about a couple months to try to bring us on under his license, and that really gave us the roadmap as to how to get licensed. The deal didn't work out. It was kind of a predatory deal at the time. And I say this in a lot of podcasts and whatnot, so I'm glad I don't say the guy's name, but I will say 3 or 4 years later, the dude did ask us if we wanted to buy his license off of him and whatnot. So there was a nice little story at the end of it. But the guy asked if we wanted to bring our product under his license. The deal didn't work out. We wasted a lot of time. And, at that time, the dispensary was kind of going through a transition. Recreational was coming in, which was taking a lot of customer base from the medical market. So they weren't allowing us to use weed anymore. So it really was like, well, we could just let this die on the vine, or we could try to make this a serious thing. And really, that's kind of what we took it all serious. We did a crowdsourcing campaign to get our licensing costs, because the previous guy that wanted to bring us under him, he showed us how he got it done. He had a lot of money. We were all younger guys. I believe I was 27. GQ was 22. I think Austin was 25. So we were all really young, but we were naive enough to think that we could do it. So we basically went on the website, and there's a practice that I still do today, always going on to the state of Colorado Marijuana Enforcement Division's website to see what's new on there. I will just read everything and just kind of try to understand compliance, because I remember that dispensary we had, they had a compliance person we could ask questions to, but they paid her a lot of money. So I was like, I could possibly do compliance. I mean, I could learn it. So I learn compliance, learn the processes of, getting the EIN number, getting the LLC articles incorporation, getting your trademark, or that's a different thing, but getting your trade name done by the Secretary of State of Colorado. We did all those things really incrementally. And then basically, we saw that, well, the state says it only costs X amount to get a license. Well, that's all we need. That's all we thought. We didn't think about rent. We didn't think about properties. We just thought the license cost this. We didn't know anything about licensing for cities and things like that, but that was all to come. So basically, we did a crowdsourcing campaign where we got a lot of help. Early on, it didn't really go well because a lot of crowdsourcing websites, they didn't allow cannabis to be on it. Now, we're in Colorado. Cannabis is everywhere, so we think the whole world is like us, but we forget, as soon as you leave the square state, it's still prohibition everywhere at the time. So the website didn't, many of the crowdsourcing websites didn't allow us to use their website. One website did, which we eventually used, but they wouldn't highlight us at all, so we wasn't able to get much traction. So basically, I was going out in the middle of the downtown, just plastering posters up. I had internships back in the day where I worked the radio doing street team work. So I did that. I took that approach. So we just went around, plastered the posters up, went and talked to all the different dispensaries about what we wanted to do, and eventually a website, or I guess it was an older tech cannabis company called Mass Roots. They emailed us and they said, "We see what you guys are trying to do. We want to blast you guys out on a newsletter." And really, from that interaction, uh, we were able to find our angel investor. He had the newsletter. He reached out to us and said, "I see what you guys are trying to do. I'm a tech small business owner in Denver, but I have an affinity for cigars. I live in Nicaragua from time of the year and whatnot, so I'm a cigar guy. So I see what you guys are trying to do and what can be done here. So let's talk." And really, that's kind of where it all really started for our full uh, licensing journey. He kind of coached us through finding real estate, figuring out compliance in terms of meeting lawyers and things like that, questions to ask, runway money, just the whole early stages of a small business and whatnot. And all he asked us to do was learn cannabis, because I'm not learning cannabis. If you guys learn it, then we could do business. If you guys are just slacking, then the conversation is going to end. So it really was up to us to, do that compliance work. I was up hours after my full-time job that I eventually got back into in television. I was hours in the evening reading about compliance, reading about the laws and things like that, and trying to game myself up to it. I saved up some money at one point to meet with the lawyer to ask them questions and whatnot. Only had 1 hour to do it, and all my money was going. But basically, it kind of got to a place where the lawyer was asking me questions. So I was like, okay, so I think I know how to do this. And it really, it came to my angel investor finding a property for us that was an old 140-year-old building next to his business. He knew the landlord, because we went through a lot of consultants and things like that to try to find property. And if it's tough to find property now. It was still tough back then. But back then, they had, you could buy a license for $2 million or something like that, or you could have rent for $70,000 a month, some crazy stuff that they would do to cannabis owners. So he was like, "Well, I know a business owner that has a building that hasn't been used for a long time. If you guys could build it out, we'll let you guys run it." So that's kind of where we got started at. And I was like, "If you got the opportunity, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna make it happen." And I wish I had photos to have the building look before we actually renovated it, but it took us about 3 years to get it right. But that's kind of where we are today. We're downtown Denver right now, probably the only like manufacturing company in the area where we are. And really is I guess I abbreviated the end, but yeah, it took us about 3 years to get fully licensed, and here we are.
That is such a cool story. I like just want to express how what I've observed about you just in like our limited like in-person interactions, but especially like what I've seen on social media is just how knowledgeable you are, but it is
Thank you.
at the investment of like everything you just outlined. And so like I just want to commend you for putting in the work because that's I just was watching a YouTube video. I'm like you. I'm always trying to get better. I think people listen to the podcast and they want the magic bullet of like, oh, this is what's going to make my business successful. And it's like, for all of these conversations, you don't see all the hard work, the after hours,
Absolutely.
the investment, the talking to people, saving up your money to like talk to a lawyer. Like, fucking kudos to you. But I was watching this YouTube video before because try to get my YouTube game up. And the guy literally said, like, the key to success is consistency. And like
Absolutely.
it just keeps like being reinforced of, we're not any better than the next person or anybody who might be listening to this. But I think what differentiates us, and especially when I'm again observing about you, is like you are just literally hustling and grinding. And maybe there's a little bit of naivety in there too, like you were saying, just like being so young and like, okay, we're gonna just like roll up our sleeves and do this. But I think that is the attitude you have to some extent in this industry. It's not tiered information like, oh, I'm not a
Absolutely.
lawyer, so I can't talk about regulation or compliance. It's funny you say that though, because I find I might know more than some people who are licensed lawyers in our industry. And it's just because I really care and I really want to invest and understand the politics and the nuances, and things are changing so fast that like again, everything you said, I'm just like, yes, Jarell, like, yes, like that's the ish. So I'm like, mic drop, everybody, like, that's what you need to be doing. That's what you need to be like inspired by, because it's those actions that accumulate over time that give you that platform and give you that runway to be able to have your brand, go in the direction that you want to go. It's not by coincidence. It's not by
Right.
chance. It's not by, oop, I got lucky today. It's like, no, I've literally like been putting posters up. I've been,
Absolutely.
grinding, reading these subreddits
And I
and
could tell
threads.
you, I tell this story from time to time with different podcasts, and I feel like when I listen to it back from times, like you said, there's more that goes into it than I can even express because I don't even think about it. But we've been doing this since 2015, so it's been about 7, 8 years, and there was many times because I was working in television when I was 22 years old. Right before I even got out of college, I did 9 internships. So when it came to that, I knew how hard it was to get those jobs. So when it came to cannabis, and then you realize that there's still a stigma out against cannabis. So when you start working in cannabis, a lot of folks won't give you a job. Now I'm black, so it's already tough enough in America to get a job. But when I worked so hard to get a career job, then I kind of transitioned to cannabis. There was many nights where, for instance, I wasn't always forward. You early on, you didn't always see my name within the Gentleman Quinns thing. We tried to be behind it because we knew we had to keep working. But there was many nights where it was just like, man, if this door doesn't open, that's not the end of the world. I mean, hey, that's the end of it. And every time we pushed a little bit, it just kept going forward. So there was many struggling nights and whatnot. I'm from Indiana. I'm from the Midwest. I'm not from out here. I don't have family here, so it feels like an island sometimes. And there's been plenty of points in this process where it was like, man, if this doesn't work out, I don't know if I'm gonna be mad about it. But then it keeps working, and it's just like, well, if it gets me to this next step, then I just got to keep pushing. And then that's just kind of where we are today. And this year has been the most growth that we've had. So it's just like, I'm a proponent of the consistency, 100%.
Absolutely. No, it's just, imperative. You have to be consistent in anything you're doing in this industry, from social media to staying on top of regulations to networking to how you choose to show up. And so, Yeah, I really appreciated getting that like personal, testimony of just like your journey, because again, I think those are some of the things that really are the most inspiring and empowering, nuggets for people to be like, like that's the message I needed to hear today to like go trudge on and like keep going through things. So I want to kind of not start because we've been talking, but like for me, I want to go back to something you said and kind of like start at the top of like breaking down what is a blunt. I think the culture of cannabis, like blunts are very traditional. If you know, were ever in high school and had friends who had like cannabis, like I had all the guy friends who, went and bought blunts, and
Right.
then we cut the tobacco out and we put the cannabis in. And even like, I say I've been consuming a long time. I don't want to pretend like I'm an expert by any means, but like backwoods and kind of like
Right.
getting into a little bit of that stuff. So like to me, I one appreciate like kind of the ingenuity of, hey, like people sell pre-rolls, like why don't they sell blunts? And then from a market perspective, I don't know if I see other people selling blunts, and you were touching a little bit on, so I don't know if I caught it fully, maybe why that was the case. Is there some regulation around nicotine products being sold in dispensaries? And like you said, yours do not have any nicotine, you're using hemp wrap. So
Absolutely.
like I just want to understand a little bit like what defines a blunt, and how have you changed what a blunt is, and how do you feel it's like.
Yeah. So, um,
Well, you touched on the success though of like launching the product and selling out, and then reintroducing it in the same dispensary, selling out. That kind of gave you the momentum. So again, like I think consumers know what a blunt is, but again, from a product perspective, maybe they don't. So I'm just curious, like how you enter that in the market, how it stands against like a pre-roll size wise. Are there any regulations around how much cannabis can go into an end product? Because I know like edibles are dictated, you can't exceed like 100
milligrams.
milligrams. Yes, like are there certain THC caps when it comes to pre-rolls? So I'm just curious to kind of like dive into that side of
Yeah,
it.
so just to start, yeah, within Amendment 69, 64, it was since the inception of the recreational market, it was already outlawed that there could be no tobacco within any products. So I imagine that early legislators, early lawyers, and guys like that that brought these things to the fold, they kind of knew what a blunt was, and they said, well, we just can't have that. Especially when uh, I guess initially everything was kind of like hands away. We kind of want to, we know that we're going to get a lot of pushback from prohibitionists. We're going to get a lot of pushback from different industries that our customers can be, taken from. So we want to be as hands off and as safe as we can be. So the first thing they did was say tobacco cannot be in any products, and that's still in our rules today. And it's a good rule. I mean, hey, we don't need the tobacco industry infiltrating the marijuana industry. I mean, it is what it is. But you know. Within the culture of cannabis, one of the earliest ways and one of the easiest ways to, consume illegal cannabis was to find wraps to put it in. You're not going to just, smoke just the bud. You got to put it into something and whatnot. And, obviously there were like papers and things like that, zigzag papers and stuff. You could put them in and make joints and stuff. But by and large, a lot of folks, if they didn't get glass, and, I was in Atlanta when Florida outlawed glass. They arrested Tommy Chong and all that nonsense back in the day. So, if it wasn't glass or joints, it would be a cigar, cigarette, or something like that, or just a blunt wrap backwoods, white owls and things like that. People would just use and whatnot. So that became its own subculture within itself. Obviously, I liked blunts when I was younger, but I got asthma. I ain't gonna lie to those people. I mean, I don't like the scratchy throats. I don't like the black lips and all that type of stuff and the bad smell. Uh, that was initially what we thought when we found these wraps. We were like, it doesn't give us any of those things. We could taste the flower now. We're not tasting tobacco and whatnot. When we let it out and relight it, you just taste the flower. As opposed to just tasting the wrap. So that was kind of, the issues with having an actual tobacco blunt in the industry. I know in some places, I believe in California at a time, they did have like Cuban cigar blunts and whatnot, but you can't do that in Colorado. And I think as nationwide legalization happens, it's probably going to be the same thing nationwide. And again, you don't really want to have the element of tobacco, big tobacco, getting into the industry in a way that could bring tobacco different products and whatnot. So I guess to wrap that all up, in terms of what a blunt is, obviously, like I said, when illegal, the culture was had flour everywhere and whatnot, when you could find flour and whatnot, brick flour and things like that. You want to put it into something, so you just went to a gas station and got, a zigzag wrap, a white owl, or a backwood and whatnot. So that's what a blunt was. Those products are called blunts. So that's what that is. And we just felt like in the industry, the things that were being highlighted when I got into the industry didn't really seem like cannabis to me. It seemed like something completely different. It seemed like they're trying to shoot things under the rug. Obviously nowadays we talk about social equity. They didn't really talk about what uh, the drug war was. That wasn't even a discussion to a lot of people. It was just, we're just happy we got weed, so let's party. And I just kind of always thought that was bullshit, if I'm being honest with you. So between that and the things in the culture that I think that needed to be heralded to the industry to make it more inclusive to people, I think the blunt itself needed to be highlighted, or at least a joint, just a pre-roll product that was a pre-roll that we all knew and loved. So it felt as though that was something that was missing. So, and we get folks that came from out of town to our dispensary that would ask for it. You guys got any blunts? Oh, we don't have any blunts, but we got all these pens that got cannabis goo in it, and we had to explain what extracts were and how that all happened and what butane was before you got the solventless stuff now. And that kind of freaked people out. Edibles freaked people out back in the day, and they were just trying to find flour. I'll just roll it myself, and some folks couldn't roll it. So pre-rolls had a market. Blunts had a interest and whatnot. So we kind of saw that from our interactions directly with customers and things like that. So that's kind of where the inception of the idea was. And then just for us, we saw that there wasn't a lot of creativity in the industry. Everybody had the same packaging. They just put different stickers on it. And packaging, nowadays it's a little bit different. You definitely got companies I shout out like Wild. They have dynamic packaging. It's awesome. But back in the day, it was just all the same little plastic tubes and stuff. And we just said that's another availability for us to change up and do something different. And that's kind of what we came with the cigar box style. Kind of try to show respect to the customers. You know, we don't want you just having a bunch of plastic tubes on your table, looking junky, because people just didn't throw them away back in the day, and they probably still don't now. But we were like, this is a valuable marketing space that if we had something interesting here, they just keep it. It'll be a talking piece, and then folks would want to buy more and things like that. So I'm kind of jumping all around the place, but hopefully that answers some of your questions.
No, it did. It answered so many questions. I appreciate that because, again, I think the thing that I take away from what you just shared, like I said in my, very haphazard personal story, being somebody who has consumed, especially being in a state that is still majority illegal for cannabis, like that was the culture. So that's like what you had access to. It's like you go to the gas station and like, what looks like I can insert cannabis into. It's either
Absolutely.
me, taking a bobby pin and poking out. Oh my God, I remember poking out
What's up?
all the little nicotine out of a cigarette, and then I would stuff
You
the
know what's
bobby
up?
pin to get the filter out. And then sometimes you're like, well, maybe I want the filter, maybe I don't want the filter. And then
Right.
of course having other friends who would go get wraps, and that was just like what you had to smoke in. I never really, I guess, like thought about it from your perspective of what you just shared in terms of like what then entered the marketplace. Like it's
Right.
true. Yes, there were zigzags, but like I think the whole concept of like raw having like cones pre-made, like that's definitely like fairly new. But this like, kind of interesting swap when legalization, I'm using quotes for the listeners, or medical started really like taking on in some of these states, Colorado especially leading the way. It's like none of the cultural products made it, but we're still smoking, but it's same but different. And so I just thought that was so interesting that you highlighted that, because it's true. It's such a familiarity for, kind of like cannabis consumers prior to legalization,
Right.
but you don't really see it in the marketplace as much. And so I'm curious with that, like, how do you, obviously it's different. So it's a standalone piece. I wouldn't say that it's comparing, like if someone comes in and they're, wanting a pre-roll, for example, like, would you say that that is the same particular type of customer? I would say there's maybe some overlap, but also I think maybe like what you sell based on, like you said, your packaging, which I definitely want to get into a little bit more because it is beautiful and it is very standalone. But like, how do you stand out to somebody and like attract them? Are they people who are familiar with blunts? Are they people who are looking for something like maybe as a gift to give? Is it more like a premium piece? Like, how does your price point stack up to other products on the market? Like, I think the point I'm getting to is obviously there's saturation in the marketplace.
Right.
there's limited availability of shelf space. Consumers are getting smarter, but let's be real, there's again so much going on. They're a little like over inundated with choice. So
Right.
it's like, how are you guiding somebody to be like, buy my product?
So there's a lot of questions here, but I will answer your previous question I didn't answer in terms of caps on cannabis.
Oh,
Obviously,
yeah.
there's in recreational, there's caps on edibles and things like that, and caps on what you can have in vapes and whatnot. But we're kind of looked at before we kind of started doing what we did. Like I said, pre rolls were kind of looked at as an afterthought product. So within the rules of Colorado, they weren't even considered a product. They were just considered, something that an allowance that a cultivation can do. So when we came into it this year recently, the top of this year, me and my business partner were part of the pre roll rulemaking and whatnot last year. So they
Awesome.
didn't even see it as a product. So basically, we're able to, you can see 10-gram blunts and things like that, or 10-gram cannagars and things based on what economic cogs you're doing. If you want to do that, now when it kind of comes to flour and economics, it kind of goes really high. So a lot of folks don't do a ton of like gigantic joints and things like that, but there's really no cap on how many uh grams and things like that you can have in a pre-roll up until the amount that people can buy. And I believe out here is about 1 ounce per purchase before it kind of gets into like some sticky waters. So you don't want to do an ounce pre-roll.
But
So
like
we
an ounce
basically,
in pre roll, it
yeah,
would be a
exactly.
lot. Like that's a lot for some. That's like a
A
party
lot of
pre roll.
pre-rolls. Absolutely. So in terms of our customers and things like that, uh, it does seem as though there's a lot of saturation in the market. In some places, in some portions of the market, there is, but there aren't a lot of different licensees out here. Uh, when it comes to saturation, I see it as a lot of folks want to be dispensary owners. There aren't a lot of product differentiation out here, and people do want to become product owners and whatnot. They usually just become edible owners, or get into the vape pen thing, or they get into topicals and stuff like that. So a lot of the times pre-rolls have kind of been like a really good landing spot for us, because we saw that it really wasn't a lot of people doing it. Cultivations have the allowance to do their own, and they just put stickers on them and whatnot, but they really don't do the full R&D of making their own product. And as you said, you have cones out here, and on every cone you see, about 90% of the product cone products that you see a little filter that says raw on it. These aren't raw products, so that just goes to show you that folks aren't really taking the time to brand their own thing. They just find the easiest thing, popping in some trim, maybe putting in some keef, maybe putting in some concentrate to boost the potency and things like that. That really doesn't give me a good experience. I wanted to create something that I would buy, because I'm a cannabis consumer, and I didn't see what we had on the market. So I wanted to get something that I knew I would buy. So basically, in terms of how we market to people, the first thing is, if you are allowed to get shelf space, because that's a tough thing right now, what are you going to do to differentiate yourself? And we immediately did that when we first started, because again, like I said, when we started, we did it as a proof of concept. You don't really get that in cannabis. You don't really get the allowance to do your own products unless you have your own vertically integrated business to see what customers like. So we had the opportunity that a lot of folks don't have. We were starting in a dispensary. We had fan base. We had the availability to ask people questions, what strains they would like, what they don't like, and we were able to get the feedback initially before we got licensed. And then what we saw was, we had these boxes that were initially, the boxes changed so many times, and we're actually about to change them again. So not to date the podcast, but we're about to do a brand new change at the top of December and whatnot, and it's going to be amazing.
It's
But
always getting
basically,
better.
painted our own boxes, hand stained them, and sanded them off and whatnot. We found stickers and whatnot to put on them and whatnot, and with the tagline and just the way the packaging looks, they immediately have shelf differentiation, visibility, and whatnot. So folks are already going to gravitate to, what is that says high class big ass blunt? That's awesome. Then they realize, oh, it's a blunt. I don't see blunts here anywhere else. I see a bunch of infused joints and things like that. But for the most part, what we try to do with my experience in early cannabis marketing was, we have to look beyond what's already here. We have to look beyond just marketing to stoners and things like that. And as you said, one of our main things is, we want to make sure that during the holiday season, that you want to buy our cannabis product between anybody else's, because it already looks like a gift. And that's kind of where some of our main fan base, customer base is. It's between women and older men that like cigars and things like that. And they see this, and it becomes a really good gift for people. So again, hopefully I answered some questions there.
No, you totally answered questions. I'm like just learning so much. I think there's I spend the most time in Colorado, so I feel like in terms of markets outside of my own here in Texas, like what I know, it's Colorado, but there's still obviously so many things that are, it's just like, it's a whole other state. And so, like, there's things that I just don't realistically know. I'm not a licensee in the state, so I don't know what it's like to actually bring a product to market. I can hear, I can ask questions, obviously, but so, like, some of these nuggets, I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, even just the tobacco idea, that makes sense because obviously you're not seeing those products, but
Right.
just kind of like the realities of how it actually impacts your business. It's very prevalent because that's, kind of the inspiration for what type of, category of product you're bringing to market. On the inside of a blunt is obviously flour, and we've been talking a little bit. I mean, you highlight certain pre-rolls, for example, might be made with different trims of the flour, different qualities. There's shake, there's trim, there's tops, there's mids, there's also infusions. People are putting concentrate in there, they're putting some goo or something, they're adding in some keef to make it special.
We
What
see everything.
Yeah, like what do you like feel inspired to do with your brand? Like, what are you currently doing, and like what is the opportunity in the market? Because you're not a cultivator, right? So how do you kind of source? Is it seasonally? Hey, we're going to buy this much flour at this quality and then we're going to make this amount of, product? Or is it more, I don't know, systematic where it's like every month I've got a different strain and we're releasing products? Like, kind of walk us through how you navigate that component, because I imagine there's people who are like, I would love to start a brand, but I think I would probably need like to cultivate my product. And that's not true. You don't need to be a cultivator. Certain states, maybe like in Texas, where you have to be vertically integrated, or Florida, but in Colorado, you don't have to be vertically integrated. So you can be a license holder and you still need to source your flour. So how do you make those relationships? How do you define what's good? You said you're a consumer, so I know a little bit about what your answer is going to be. It's obviously like, what do I want to consume? So I have to make sure it's like this quality and that and the other. But I'm just curious how you start to like navigate that. Do you work with the same farm? Have you changed farms? Is it indoor versus outdoor versus greenhouse? Like, what makes you excited, and like what makes your consumers excited?
See, this is why I like this podcast. You actually ask the real questions.
Oh, thank you.
And I will say to people, like, in terms of the business of Gentleman Quinns, I started in the industry doing marketing for a dispensary. And then I eventually became the CEO of the group, between the group of guys that I work with and whatnot. And we have a lot of hats on. So hopefully folks gleam onto the fact that we're not only talking about marketing on my favorite marketing podcast, we're talking about operations, we're talking
That's
about
right.
logistics. We got to do everything. So it's not only just a one thing. And I tell folks all the time, no one's crying for cannabis owners. Everybody thinks we have $1 million, which we don't. Everybody thinks that it's fun and we're just smoking weed all day. Like, no one's crying for us. So we have to do all the hard work just because it needs to be done. And we really have to build these brands as though we're competing with a Pepsi. So that's kind of the way I look at it. So there's a lot of sides to this. When we worked in the dispensary, the first thing I really noticed was, because there's so much vertical integration that is forced into the different markets, you have to have a lot of overhead, and you have to do things that you have to basically run 4 or 5 businesses at once. You know what I mean? A lot of folks are good at doing one thing. If you want to start a dispensary, you might be good at being a cultivator. You don't know anything about hiring. You don't know anything about employment, and that may be the crux of your entire business. So we noticed there was a lot of overhead issues with dispensaries and cultivations. So what we basically said was, if we're going to do this and we only need a license to uh, do our rolling and whatnot, well, let's use that to our fullest advantage. So that allowed us to go to every cultivation in the state and just pick the flower that we liked, and get the right price point and things like that. Now, like you said, it's about relationships, and what got more complicated was testing and whatnot. So when you got testing, they already test their flower before it goes into the market in some ways, and then we have to come back and retest it to make sure that it's good enough as a product to go to consumers. So that makes it a little bit more complex. So what we used to do was, we go to a bunch of different places. We try to get a bunch of different of the best strains that we liked. We have what we call a tasting table, whereas it could be between 3 to 5 or 7 of us all tasting different strain samples that we've gotten from places, and just kind of seeing what we liked and what we didn't like. Because what I did notice early on was, you do these joints and they're all trim inside. Sometimes I get a headache. Sometimes I wouldn't get stoned at all. And it just seemed like it was a big jip. Now, by and large, a lot of places just gave you joints and stuff like that. But when it comes to like being a full product, I wanted to make sure that, the consistency and the experience was at least, homogenous between people who would buy them all the time. So basically, we have a system where we, get samples. We have everybody tell us what they think of it, and we come to a consensus. We use only full bud. We don't use any popcorn. We don't use any trim, just because of the issues that I just explained. Consistency issues, or not even actually getting stoned. So we actually put the money in to get the more expensive flour and whatnot. What we see with a lot of brands is, or at least in pre rolls, because cultivators actually make a lot of the pre-roll brands out here, they do 15 different strands and whatnot. So there's not really, it's too much choice. So what we do is we do about 4 strands a quarter. So we could just have the consistency, we could have the quality assurance over what we're buying and whatnot. So we don't do a ton of different variety, but we make sure that, we market it. So that when you get a Gentleman Quinn's product, that you're going to get something that was touched by everybody in the company, that we know what we're giving to you. So it's just not, we're just popping out a bunch of different things. We didn't do the infused route, which, economically right now works for us because there's way more testing that goes into that. And that by and large, I'm I don't want to say anything to disrespect any hash like users and whatnot, because eventually Gentleman Quinns will have a hash blunt, but I'm not the biggest hash guy. I feel like it really boils down to what the flour is, and if your flour is good, you're not going to have a problem. But because a lot of folks are using trim, they're using all these different type of variations of the flour itself, the quality is low. So they have to add things in, like, oh, I'm gonna just do a snake of oil or butter or something like that, and that's gonna boost the potency up. Oh, I got 45% potency. Not worrying about the terpene quality, not worrying about all the different things that would give you a good experience.
Right.
So because of that, we just kind of want to stick with something simple. And that's the whole thing about Gentleman Quinns. We have dynamic looking packaging and things like that, but it's simple. We don't have a crazy graphic design on our stuff. We don't have crazy blunts. It's a really simple, basic thing that gets the job done. You can light it, relight it. It's going to be the same experience every time. And again, it's about respecting the customer. We don't want to, glom on a million different things just to have you buy a product and then you take it home and it's not exactly what you were expecting. And that's part of it as well. So when it comes to it, we have to have relationships with different grows and things like that. We go to every cultivation we meet with. We sit down with the master growers. We sit down with the business owners. We tell them what we're doing. We show them the website. We show them, we present them with our samples of our products and let them know that, we're not just taking anything you give us and whatnot. And there's been times when we went to places that gave us a great tour and whatnot, but we didn't buy anything from them because their quality wasn't up to our standards. So that's kind of what we try to bring to the market. And, in terms of those relationships, I believe growers and things like that really appreciate that, because they see that we're not just just taking anything. We're taking the boutique feel that they put into the flower when they grow it, and we're actually giving good care to how we present it, and we show love to those guys in our marketing and whatnot. We let them know where we buy the flower from. We highlight those guys, and it's a really good ecosystem, because that's kind of what you have to do in the industry right now.
Yeah, like what you just said about, yes, there's these like, I don't want to call them frivolous necessarily, but like, kind of like I don't even know if I want to call it additives. I'm like, wait a minute, these words are a little strong. But you know what I mean? When people are adding things to their products to sell it, it is, I like to remind myself, really myself, I remind myself, everything starts and ends with the flower. So what is like that purity of just like good bud, and how do you highlight that and showcase that? And especially with flower based products, I think it is interesting because there's a little bit of a time where, like, an observation I make right now about the general market across the nation, but especially in Colorado, just from some recent trips, like a lot of people are promoting live resin. Like live resin is like really popular. And so I could imagine it's really easy to be like, oh, let me just go do a little drizzle of live resin because maybe it's a marketing thing and it'll stick and be something that I can, kind of cash on in this moment. But there is also just like the boundary of like not wanting to actually, I guess, like deflate your brand, because that's not really the direction that you're trying to go. Like you don't need to kind of like jump on some of these like popular trains, because like you're trying to build something that's like independent and speaks for itself. And so I love the highlight too of, just building these relationships with these cultivators and just trying their products and trying to see like what's going to make the most sense for your brand. And then the marketing side too, I was going to ask about that, so I'm glad you touched on that. Some brands, obviously in different markets, I'll say too, don't always want to highlight where the bud came from because it takes away perhaps from their brand. And I'm not going to sit here and be like that's right or wrong. I think there's, different ways to skin a cat to get there. But, when you can kind of capitalize, maybe you're using flower from a cultivator that has some brand equity. How do you leverage that? They're obviously excited to be in your product. You're excited to use their brand too. And it's like, how can you like lift each other up and kind of grow your audience at the same time? So I just think it's a really interesting, kind of symbiotic kind of relationship that people should be more considerate of.
Absolutely. And a lot of different, not even just cultivators, but a lot of brands in general don't think they have to do a lot with marketing. Uh, they don't want to pay for somebody to do marketing for them. This is what I see in Colorado. They don't really want to pay for it, and they just kind of think, you could just put some stuff on social media from time to time, and you're good to go. You could just pay for a magazine ad that you get from, maybe a marketing agency or something like that, and they're good to go. And they don't really want to do the engagement. They don't want to do the consistency, and that's it. So we see a lot of cultivators that we work with realizing what we're doing in terms of the consistency. We make our own content. We kind of do everything kind of in house. So they kind of see that and they see that there's an advantage into working with us. Uh, like I said, we highlight those guys, and again, it's a symbiotic relationship, and that's kind of what all we could really do in the industry as we have so many advertising restrictions.
Out of all the things that you do from a marketing perspective, out of all the channels, given your, background and history of kind of coming from a little bit of like, the television world where it is maybe just the timing or just the nature of the industry, I think a little bit more guerrilla marketing, how you promote things, radio shows, kind of like magazine, that's obviously shifted presently. I would say like those are still maybe, interesting channels to be considered of, but in the myriad of things that you can do or like levers you can pull as a marketer, what are some of your top channels or like experiences like that you think have really like moved the needle for your brand that you've invested in?
So it's a lot of variety. So I say the most important that people should pay attention to is just like being in store and actually having tender education so they can talk about your product to customers directly. That's most important for me, what I see. But I think in terms of just branding yourself to folks that come from out of state and they don't live in Colorado, social media is obviously important. uh you know I hate to highlight these spots too much because they don't give us a lot of leeway, but obviously Instagram's pretty big, Twitter and things like that. I've been doing small things on TikTok, but I've actually seen a lot of boost and a lot of encouragement from LinkedIn. Those guys actually, they don't kick you off. They don't send you weird little emails in the middle of the night, take content that you had from months ago and say this violates A, B, and C. They actually put you in newsletters and actually boost up what the business is. So LinkedIn's been pretty good, especially from a B2B type situation, meeting the actual other professionals and things like that, or just folks that work in professional settings that can't necessarily do the cannabis thing outwardly, but they still want to see what's going on. They don't do social media because they're older. All these different type of things, but I think it's important to actually get out there and meet people, meet the customers, and have folks understand what your product is. But I also think it's really important to build your brand. Actually have, what does your logo mean? What are the colors that you allude to when you have branding that goes out there and whatnot? How do these things come back to what your brand is and whatnot? And I'm an illustrator, so from time to time I do my own illustrations that other brands just can't do. It's a lot of things that we do as Gentleman Quinns. A lot of folks just can't copy and whatnot, and that's what I'm kind of really fortunate of, because if it was any other product, they probably would have redone a gentleman Quinn something else in another state. But it's so hard to do what we do because we do everything in house, and just the different varied skills that me and my business partners have, it really works out in that direction. But I guess just to answer your question, it's just a myriad of things, and Twitter's decent, but Instagram tends to be one of the bigger ones that get engagement, and just doing pop-ups, meeting with the business owners and meeting with bud tenders is pretty important.
Yeah, such a double-edged sword. I always am like when I get asked that question too, people expect me to, on one hand, not promote social media because it's so toxic for us. But on the other hand, I'm like, but that's where the customers are. So, maybe my post gets taken down today, but maybe it doesn't. And maybe that is a chance for me to get in front of my target customer or get, a message out or get a piece of branding out. And so
Absolutely.
it's hard not to like lean into those platforms. And I just know so many people have so much challenge with it, but it's also, kind of, I just always say it's par for the course. So like our Facebook is down right now. I couldn't even tell
I
you
saw
what we
that.
posted, but it's like 3 days. And I'm like, when the fuck did I even get this violation? And so that just shows how often I'm paying attention to Facebook. But knowing that they're intermingled with Instagram, it's like,
Absolutely.
okay, well, did I violate Instagram or did I actually violate Facebook? I don't know. I just want to post. Let me do what I need to do. So yes, it's an unfortunate uphill battle, but I think you said it right though, which is music to my ears. I love branding. I think branding is so important. It's why, people pick Coke over Pepsi. Sorry, all you Pepsi lovers out there. It's an insuperior product compared to the Coke branding. I think we can all agree on that.
I wouldn't be right from being from the Midwest if I allowed that to stand. All right. Now I lived in Atlanta and I had to deal with this for many years, but Pepsi is our drink.
Really? But I thought Coca-Cola was headquartered in Atlanta.
That's what I'm saying. In the Midwest, Pepsi's a drink. In Atlanta, I just have to deal with Coca-Cola.
Got it,
But
got it, got it. I see, I
Midwest is
see.
Pepsi.
Well, okay, as a Texan in the South, Coke is superior. And if I'm being really honest, Dr. Pepper is my preference. So that shows you, where I come from. But it is that kind of mentality. And I know I talk about it a lot on the podcast, but it's so important for the listeners to just understand what makes someone like grab a product off the shelf. Did you have a connection, like you're saying, in store where you got to experience that product and meet someone from the brand? Did you see something on social media that aligned with some value that you have or some branding that really, looked cool to you? Was it a packaging that you saw? Was it, what are those tangible things that someone is identifying with your brand? And you need to kind of think of that ecosystem that you're creating, whether it's how you speak, what people see, what they smell, what they taste. Like those are all
Absolutely.
you like giving your brand, the best like platform to just like go exist to shine really.
And
And
it's
I
really
just
about the taste the people in the business have, because a lot of the times it's just like, whatever works is homogeny. But if you actually have taste, if you actually have like a point of view specifically to you and your brand, that brings people on. If it's just like, I'm gonna just do what works, well, there's no real point of view there. You're just going for, what brings sales in, and a lot of times that just kind of kills your business eventually, which is what we've been seeing this year. A lot of brands have been changing hands and things like that and doing the general thing. We're just going to make, if we're making products, we're going to make every product. If we have a dispensary, we're going to make the dispensary like an Apple store, like everybody else did. I'm always really surprised that we don't have specific types of dispensaries. We don't have a hash dispensary only for hash. We don't have a dispensary medically only for topicals and things like that. Everybody just wants to do everything, so there's no real point of view to it. So there's a lot of runway. Hopefully people do these things in the future. We'll see.
I like that point. I think it's always good to challenge, the status quo. And I think the only way that we're going to see change in the industry is by being the change. It's so cliche, be the change you want to see. But I think the industry puts up so many parameters that prevent us from going in certain directions that what space we do have to exist in is like ripe for interpretation. And so I just, really commend you for kind of swerving, the other direction when everybody else is going on the road straight ahead. And it's obviously proof that you really value what opportunity you have to be able to make an impact in the industry, build a beautiful brand, connect with your target consumer. And I'm just so glad I was able to have you on the podcast finally. So
I
thanks for
appreciate
being
you.
here.
And I would like to add, one of my favorite episodes of yours is when you had Jane West and Olivia Alexander, because they really talked about
Oh,
some
hell
real
yeah.
things that happen in the industry. Now, obviously, John Shoots, my homie. There's a lot of folks that I've seen on the podcast. Steve D'Angelo was a really good one, but I really love the Olivia Alexander and the Jane West one because they really talked about some real issues in the industry, and I really hope folks go back and watch those.
Oh
But
my
watch this
God.
one first.
Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. Everybody needs to first like hit play on this when this goes live. If you're watching on video, thanks for being on video. If you're listening when this episode comes out, thank you for being there as well. But I appreciate, you just, blowing some good vibes my way, because it is such a difficult industry to exist in, and I try to create a safe space for people to speak transparently. My whole goal and kind of vision, as I'm sure you can, understand and relate to, and you've observed just from listening, but maybe someone's listening who's new. Hello, the podcast is called To Be Blunt. I want to speak about real challenges, real
Absolutely.
issues, and we're not all going to have the same perspective. And I think we've kind of lost that, if I'm being honest, a little bit in America these days. And I think that it's healthy to have discord, because you want to get better ultimately, I think, right? Like, we want to grow, we want to implement better practices. And how can you grow if you're just doing the same thing, or listening to the same people, or
Absolutely.
subscribing to the same message? So thanks
Well, I
for
tend I
saying that.
tend to be a little bit more like pragmatic about things, so I try not to be too high or too low and whatnot. But when they were on the podcast, I'm like about to punch a wall. I'm like, they're saying the shit that needs to be said. Yes. So I really appreciated those. Absolutely. And Chanel Lindsay, she was pretty good as well. So I appreciate your podcast.
Shout
I'm
out
a
to
fan.
all these people. They've been so great. You're now among the ranks, and you're one of them. And I'm just like seriously so grateful. Like, you're so knowledgeable. Thanks for openly sharing. And definitely everybody got to go check out Gentleman Quinns. I was going to ask too, you're just in Colorado. I don't want to say just, but Colorado is like home base. Are you looking at getting into other markets?
Yeah, so absolutely. Obviously, like I said, I didn't want to date the podcast, but I
That's
already
okay.
did say we're about to change our packaging up. So you're about to see more dynamic packaging here in about a couple weeks,
Hell yeah.
in 2022 towards 2023. But to date the podcast, we are actually having an expansion plan to Oregon. We have some really good friends out there that the stars have aligned perfectly at the end of this year for us to kind of make that transition, for us to become a small MSO in our own way. So we're about to do a small launch there within Q1 of 2023 in Oregon, starting in Bend, Oregon, and I'm really happy about that.
Outstanding. Massive congratulations. I know it is such an exciting time, and it doesn't come without a lot of sleepless nights trying to orchestrate everything and make sure that it's, signed and dotted and X'd and O'd. But absolutely congratulations. Such a pleasure, Jarell. Truthfully, you're just like, I'm inspired. I feel like I just learn so many new things all the time, and so grateful to have you in my corner. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. This is amazing. This is one of my favorites.